Welcome back for another video. I'm Erbad, a free-to-play endgame player in Raid Shadow Legends. Today I want to talk to you about the arena, and in particular Tag Team Arena, about how I would advise analysing your roster to best progress. I would first suggest identifying champions in your roster that fall into the following categories: Nuker, Cleanser, Stripper, Control, Support, and lastly, Protection. Roughly speaking, Protection nullifies Nuker, Stripper nullifies Support, and Cleanser nullifies Control. Borderline. There are obviously more nuances and permutations to this, but it's a good initial starting thought process to have. So let's examine some examples and budget options for each category. Within the Nuker camp, we could think of S-tier champions such as Baron, Leoris, Hefrak, Trunder, etc., whilst many budget options exist in all tiers, such as Genbo, Skullcrown, or if you're just starting out, even your starter rare can fill that role. Meanwhile, in cleansers, I would consider an S-tier cleanser to be Mithrala, who we all can get through Hydra, whilst other budget options such as Skytouch and Scathix are also available. If we move on to strippers, the S-tier champions primarily, I would say, are people such as Ramantu and Kaimar. But again, there are budget options such as Madame, Sethalia, and Rian the Conjurer through Doom Tower normal secret rooms. In terms of control, again, the S-tier champions would be someone like Warlord or Yumiko, whilst a budget version of this kind of skill control is Basher. In addition to that, we could think of other kind of accessible control champions, such as Yakal, who you can get through the clan shop, Visix, who is a login reward, and even Nullhorn, who is a rare champion that hopefully everyone will get at some point. In terms of support, the S-tier champions that I'd be looking for, people like Siphi or Duchess, whilst other more accessible options would be Arbiter, for instance, who we all get for free through the missions, Brogni, who was a fusion about, 18 months ago, I guess, Yoshi, previous fusion as well, and even Cardinal's fantastic too. It really depends on your stage of progress and your roster, but generally speaking, looking for someone who's either a speed booster, reviver, or provides critical buffs. The only rare I could think of that really fills this role would be Apothecary or Doomscreech. Again, this is in the very kind of early game budget zone. And lastly, protection champions. The kind of S-tier champions here would be someone like Necrit, who is hands down the best protection champion in the game. Whilst more accessible options would be Ultimate Death Knight, who is currently a free login champion, Vogoth, who is an epic, and you could even rely on certain sets to provide that protection, such as Stone Skin, Guardian, Bolster, or even Shield set. Other options could be to rely on powerful passives, such as Seeker, Kyoku, or even Norog. There is another key category, which is disruption, but it's not as clear-cut, and usually most disruption is in a form of control. So really it's a subset of controllers. But it's champions that either force attackers to bring a mechanic to deal with them, e.g. making the enemy bring block debuffs against a Tormin, or allow you as the attacker to disrupt the defense. For example, it could be a crowd control Hegemon, a Tormin, or a Valkyrie. Each of those champions will ultimately disrupt what the enemy are going to do and enable you to wrestle back control. So if we look at my roster, I currently have the following champions built. Within Nukers, I have Leoris, Cantrophon 1, Cantrophon 2, Trunder, and Tormin. In terms of cleansers, I have Mithrala and Wither. Strippers, I have Ramantu hiding there, Kaimar, Madame, and Cephalia, who I am not using very often. So it's not actually appearing high up in the recently used, so all the way down there. In terms of control, I have Basher, wherever he's hiding, there he is. Kaimar again would be a dual use case, so another form of control. Ramantu, to a certain degree, provides some control, and Tormin as well. So the only ones that are kind of providing a degree of consistency and control really are Basher and Kaimar, whilst the other two are niche or use cases. In terms of support, I have Duchess 1 and 2. I have Arbiter. And then as a more kind of niche use, I also have Lady Kimmy, Yoshi, and Brogni. Again, Yoshi and Brogni are very rarely used when I'm actually doing Arena at the moment, but they are available. So again, there's Yoshi, and Brogni's hiding somewhere. Who knows where? Anyway, haven't used him recently, I guess. And then lastly, in terms of protection, we have Asuga, we have Ultimate Death Knight, and then again, a champion that I am not using that frequently, but is available as a third protection champion, is Vogoth. So if I consider the weaknesses in my current lineup for Arena, just by breaking down into these categories, I could say, ideally, I would want a third cleanser. I have Mithrala and Wither, but I don't have a third cleanser built in case I need 3 teams, each with a cleanser. So that should be something that I should prioritize building. I would also say having another form of reliable control would be important. And in my instance, I'm going to look at building a second Basher out. I do actually have a second Basher. I've ranked him up to 50. I will look to rank him to 6-star in the next champion training and look to farm some masteries in the next CVC. So it's in my mindset to get that going. And then in terms of protection, I wish I had a Necrit, but I should also potentially consider looking into building another form of protection champion. And for me, that might be to build someone in a bolster set, for instance, or a shield set, something along those lines. Potentially even regear my Brogni to fill that role, just to give me a slightly different form of protection where I might not be able to rely on my existing protection champions to fit the bill. So I feel like those are my weaknesses. Once you've identified the champions you have for each category, the best champions in your roster, and then identified what you need to work on, obviously we need to get building these champions. And that's as important as identifying the correct champions to use within your roster, is actually getting those champions built correctly. So if we focus initially on Nukers, in general, we're looking at Savage or Lethal on them. There are use cases where you might use Swift Parry, Stone Skin, Immunity. These can all be viable as well. And, ultra endgame, when you have reaction accessories to consider, you may want your Nukers to be particularly slow, assuming you have good control. So, once you start hitting that kind of really high-end Gold 4 tag team or Plat Arena in Classic, things do start to change a little bit. But I'd say as a general kind of rule of thumb, pre-Platinum Arena, and if you want to have other considerations such as usability and other content, I would say personally I like to build my Nukers around sort of 190 to 210 speed and keep them all in quite a narrow range, so I'm able to swap them around within each team without significantly affecting the tunes. If we have a quick look at my Leoris and Kandrathon builds, right now, Leoris 208 at the higher end of that speed range that I mentioned. I have him built a little bit quicker because I do use him in other content. I use him as my Doom Tower normal wave clearer. I use him if I ever wanted to do, say, Nightmare Campaign, he can do that. If I wanted, well, I do use him for Minotaur farming. I use him in a lot of speed teams within Doom Tower boss stages if I need a wave clearer. So Myliorus is really multi-use, not just arena, but I use him elsewhere. So I tend to have him at the higher end of what I would say is like an acceptable speed range for an arena nuker. Ideally, I'd slow him down if I was really just totally focusing on arena. But because I try and have my champions usable in multiple areas, there's always a balancing act, right? And then beyond that, I have enough accuracy that he's usable in the majority of content, but it's not something I'm focusing on to have high for within arena. And then it's as much damage as I can possibly get. And then in terms of Candrathon, I'm running him in Swift Parry. I'm actually running both Candrathons in Swift Parry. And I have actually considered I might try and move one of my Candrathons out of Swift Parry, either into Stone Skin or Immunity. It's something that is in my mind. Particularly, I notice if I run Mithrala as a cleanser against a Tormin team, Candrathon can get frozen, which is quite annoying. But in terms of stats, we got him bang in the middle of the range, around the 200 speed, and then just maximum damage. You can see again with Candrathon 2, similar situation, but lower end of the speed range. Don't quite have the gear to have him as quick. So, but again, within the range, Trunda, once again, we're looking within that range. So I'm trying to keep all my nukers at a similar speed. So I am able to, move them around when on offense and not mess around with the tune. Torment again, similar, got him around that 200 speed. So they're in a very narrow range. Like I said, if you were really a plat pusher, you would probably be changing these builds quite considerably. Things get very, very different at top end plat than they do for the rest of the game. It's not something that I've personally had that much experience with, but I have seen content around plat pushers. And it's a different kind of game to what the majority of us face. I guess I get my closest examples on that when I'm farming gold 4 in tag team. In addition to these attack-based nukers that we just looked at, I would say it's also really good to have an HP or defense-based nuker, as it does give you a bit more versatility and a few other options, particularly in terms of having a nuker who can take a hit. Currently, I have Tormin built for one of these roles, so he is a savage nuker for me. In time, I will probably build out Ragash. It's in my mindset to build him as an alternative defense-based nuker. But without having a Siphi, the best setup I have for a defense-based nuker is Mithrala. I do sometimes use Withir as a setup as well. So both my cleansers can set up defense nukers, but it's not quite as consistent as I would like. But it is something to consider. I would say it's a useful tool to have in your arsenal, is to not only rely on attack-based nukers. Right, if we go on to cleansers, generally speaking, I'd say these need to be built in either immunity or stone skin, and that's to ensure that they can perform their cleanse. If the enemy has a stripper, you may also need high resistance to avoid that. And the reason we say immunity as well as high resistance or instead of is that immunity is required to avoid irresistible mechanics and artifact sets, which also cannot be resisted. So if we have a look at my Mithrala and Withir builds, at the moment both of these champions are in untouchable. Mithrala, obviously through her passive, ends up being a high resistance build de facto, and Withir currently doesn't have high resistance rather, but it is something that I would look to develop on her if I get better gear to facilitate that. But at the moment, they're both in untouchable. At some point, I would probably like to move them, to stone skin or to move one of them to stone skin. And like I said, I'd probably like to build a third one. Now, I generally run my 2 cleansers on the quick side, and there are legitimate arguments to slow them down. You don't want the enemy's debuff or control champion to go after your cleanser. So there's this whole kind of balancing act of you trying to determine when your cleanser should go versus when you think the enemy's control or debuffer is going to go. So for me, I think it greatly depends on whether you're using the cleanser for offense or defense. And I'd say in my experience, I've found if I'm using a cleanser on offense, mostly I need them to be a bit quicker. But on defense, I can definitely see the rationale for having a much slower build, particularly if your team has a lot of stone skin or protected buffs. So there's no rule on how you should build your cleansers, but bear in mind you do want them to be the quickest on your team. So if you have fast support, you're probably going to need fast cleansers. Onto strippers. High accuracy is the main requirement here. As for the speed, there are various schools of thought as to the timing you want. On the one hand, speed tuned with your Nuker means you can avoid a cleanser or support on the enemy team cutting in. On the other hand, if you need to strip before applying control, then you're going to need a fast stripper, and that might suit your team better. So again, there isn't a definitive rule on how fast your strippers should be built. It's something that you're going to have to look at within this set of champions that you're focusing on and determine what's going to work best for you. Suffice to say, you obviously do want high accuracy, and as a consequence, the go-to set is going to be perception. But likewise, immunity and stone skin also have their place. So if we have a quick look at my Romantu build, for instance, my Romantu is quite quick, and there is a big gap between Romantu and my Nukers, which can be quite annoying. But I'm currently relying on Romantu also in some instances as a form of control, as I don't have multiple bashers and I don't have a warlord or Yumiko. So I'm kind of in this awkward situation where ideally I would have Romantu slow closer to my Nuker and not allow any cut in, but also I need Romantu for a form of control. So it's kind of a bit subjective as to what you should do. I will probably look to slow down my Romantu when I move him to stone skin. But as it is at the moment, he's quite high speed and he's as much accuracy as I can possibly get. And then on the Madame, because she isn't really a control champion in any way, shape or form, we've got on high accuracy, but we have slowed her down. I could probably slow her even a bit more, get her closer to those Nuker speeds, probably take off like another 15 speed or so would be better. And similarly, if I look to rebuild her into stone skin at some point, that's probably something that I would look to do at that point. I do use Sethalia occasionally if I do need a third stripper. And I will probably at some point build Rian the Conjurer, the Doom Tower epic we get from the normal secret rooms, who not only has a strip and a weaken, but also has a revive in the mix. We also have the recent fusion Uko, who can provide some form of buff stripping, potentially block buffs as well if there's no protected buffs, and then also has increased speed / a revive. So again, Uko could be a very good option in terms of a stripper, and will probably end up being the one I'll use in my third slot once I have Uko built properly as well. So that again, it's just about looking through your roster, identifying which champions you have, and then making sure the ones you want to use in arena are built the best you can. On to control champions. If we have a look at what you want to do, in general, it's going to be high accuracy once again, and in general, high speed. In a traditional speed team, you want your control speed tuned to your speed booster, and in that instance, the speed booster would be your support. Once again, perception, immunity, and stone skin are the go-to sets. Speed is also feasible for your control champion, but the reality is perception has a higher stat value, so it's not really the optimum set to build in. I would always choose building a control champion in perception with speed substats than a speed set with accuracy substats. We look at the Basher build. High speed, high accuracy is what I have. I used to use champions such as Countess Lix, who I paired with Astralon as a form of control, and Astralon being my Nuker, way back when we got Countess Lix as a guaranteed champion. And obviously Astralon was a fusion at that point. That was kind of my go-to control nuke combo before I pulled any of the nukers I currently use. The best controls in the game are Warlord and Yumiko. I don't have either of those, but skill cooldown extension goes through Stone Skin, it goes through immunity, it cannot be cleansed. It is the absolute best form of control in the game. Otherwise, a form of hard crowd control that is the next best option would be stun, since it doesn't reduce your damage output. But freeze and petrification are also good examples of hard crowd control. The problem with these kind of crowd control mechanics, however, is block debuffs, stone skin, etc. can prevent you from placing them. There are soft crowd control options as well. Popular choices would be provoke or block cooldown skills. However, these don't stop the enemy from taking turns. They can be cleansed, and enemies can still make use of their passive skills and extra turns. That said, soft crowd control is better than no crowd control. So again, depends on where you are within the game, what you have open or available to you, but those are kind of the three schools of crowd control. On to support. This is a very diverse category, and it depends considerably on the type of champion. Speed may be a consideration, particularly if your team is designed to go first. So a good example there would be Arbiter, built in the fastest gear I have on my account, ends up actually being perception and 2 speed sets. And if we have a look at the Duchess as well, slightly different build. So we've got Swift Parry with the Duchess, again, pretty quick, and also got some resistance in the Duchess build. So it very much depends. You could be looking for high effective HP, high resistance, fast. You could be looking to build them in speed sets, Swift Parry or Stone Skin, even potentially in immunity. So there's a lot of diverse ways that you might be looking to build your support champions, and it completely depends on what support champion specifically we're talking about. I'm probably going to build a Cardinal in Stone Skin just to give me another potential option for a go second team to try and counter some enemy compositions that I'm struggling with at the moment, or just to give me a different way of playing and something else to showcase to you guys. Lastly, we have the protection type champions, similar to the support category in that there are many different routes in how you can build one of these champions, and it really depends on the nature of the support champion. So, for instance, Necra is really best served with a protection set to try and ensure that his buffs cannot be cleansed, cannot be removed, i.e. become protected buffs. Whilst classic supports could be built in Guardian, Stone Skin, or Bolster set, for instance. Typically, these champions are going to be built slow or very slow with very high effective HP. Asuga here I have built in Guardian, a little bit quicker than most people would probably build their Asugas, because I actually use Asuga in the HP support rooms as a debuffer to get decreased defense on before my HP based nukers go. So it's a bit of an odd one that I end up having my Asuga faster to be used in Doom Tower secret rooms. But I make it work at the end of the day. You can't always have perfect builds for every area of the game unless you have multiple duplicates or if you want to be spending silver swapping gear. So I try and find like a balance between all the areas of the game that I want to use a champion and end up with some kind of hybrid build. If we then have a look at Ultimate Death Knight, very different build here, extremely slow, high effective HP, started to build up the resistance in full 6-piece stone skin. So very different builds between my Asuga and my Ultimate Death Knight, and a lot of that's down to the fact that I don't use Ultimate Death Knight anywhere other than Arena, whereas Asuga I am using elsewhere. So with Asuga, I have enough accuracy to be usable within faction wars and the secret rooms. But again, Ultimate Death Knight, it doesn't matter to me, so it doesn't have accuracy to be usable really anywhere. In time, I'd like to build his resistance up higher, but I need better stone skin for that. Right, so I hope this hasn't been too much of an information overload. It's certainly a lot to take on, but I will look to break it down in further videos examining the champions available for each category and showcase the ones I have in a few fights. In the meantime, I do have 5 videos showcasing Tag Team Arena resets where I've shown all the champions in action and how I select my teams to counter the enemy. Whilst the focus here is primarily on Tag Team Arena, the same strategies apply to regular Arena as well. So yeah, I hope you find this useful. I hope you find it interesting. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And do let me know any feedback in terms of this format of a video. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of me talking with not a lot of gameplay. But I felt it was important to have a video of this nature to start to help people analyze their rosters and make decisions about which champions to build. We can then look at some additional videos in terms of gearing and strategies around how to use specific champions. But I wanted something kind of general that would apply to as many people as possible. So hopefully this has done that. Yeah, once again, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.